I moved into Cedar Ridge Estates for the same reason anyone moves into a place like this: quiet streets, good schools, and the promise of a community that doesn't involve my neighbor's rusted-out Chevy sitting on cinder blocks in his front yard. The HOA brochure called it a premier residential haven, which, in hindsight, should have been my first clue that I was walking straight into a Stepford suburb nightmare. I lasted exactly 5 days before I met Linda Delacroix. Linda was the kind of woman who carried a clipboard as if it had been surgically attached to her hand. The kind whose voice always hovered an octave higher than necessary, every sentence ending in a forced chuckle that barely masked the venom underneath. She had the look of someone who was permanently offended by the mere existence of other people. Her hair, a precisely frosted helmet, didn't move in the wind. Neither did her opinion of herself. I was out front, tossing a tennis ball for Jax, my Belgian Malinois, when she descended on me like a Stepford Valkyrie. "You must be the new homeowner," she announced, her lips curling into something that could only technically be called a smile. "That's me," I said, offering my hand. "Nathan Carter." Linda didn't take it. Instead, her gaze landed on Jax, who was sitting by my side, panting happily. Her face twisted like she'd just smelled spoiled milk. "Oh," she said, voice dripping with polite revulsion. "That's a large dog." I scratched Jax behind the ears. "Yeah, he's a sweetheart." Linda didn't acknowledge this blatant lie. Jax was not a sweetheart. He was a highly trained working dog who, in his downtime, liked to make eye contact with squirrels and watch them have an existential crisis. But I wasn't about to explain that to a woman whose idea of a security system was probably a Ring camera and prayer. She sniffed. "Well, just so you're aware, the HOA has very strict guidelines on pet appearances. We like to keep things aesthetically appropriate." "Aesthetically appropriate?" "Yes, friendly-looking breeds. We've had some complaints in the past about intimidating dogs." I resisted the urge to laugh. "He's a pet. He's well-trained. There's nothing intimidating about him." Linda squinted at me like I was a particularly dense toddler. "It's not about us. It's about the community's comfort." The conversation ended with Linda huffing away, and I assumed that was the last of it. I was wrong. So wrong. The next morning, I found the first note. Notice of pet policy infraction. "Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that you are in violation of Section 14A, subsection 6 of the Cedar Ridge Estates Homeowners Code, which states, 'All pets must adhere to the community's aesthetic and safety standards.'" The note went on to explain that my dog was causing undue distress to other residents, and that I had 48 hours to submit an appeal or consider rehoming the animal. I laughed. I threw it away. The next day, another note. This one printed on official letterhead. The day after that, a fine. A $500 fine. When I didn't respond, Linda showed up at my door. "I'm really trying to be patient, Nathan," she said, in a tone that suggested patience was not, in fact, something she had ever practiced. "You don't want to be at odds with the HOA. Trust me." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "And what happens if I don't pay your ridiculous fine?" Linda sighed. "I'd hate to escalate this. But if you don't comply, we have the authority to place a lien on your property. A lien over my dog." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. Instead, Linda pursed her lips and gave me a look that said, "You'll see," before spinning on her heel and marching away. The next few days were an escalating circus of passive aggression. My mailbox started filling with increasingly condescending HOA bulletins about community compliance. My trash cans mysteriously went missing, only to reappear knocked over in the street. A neighbor who had been perfectly friendly the week before suddenly stopped making eye contact. Then came the emails. "Nathan, I strongly encourage you to reconsider your stance on this issue. It would be a shame if you found yourself in violation of multiple HOA regulations. Regards, Linda Delacroix." By multiple regulations, she apparently meant the 3 new violations I received that week. Grass height exceeding community standards by half an inch. Failure to maintain an HOA-approved mailbox color. Mine was black. Approved shades were charcoal elegance and sophisticated graphite. Improper holiday decorations. I had a single pumpkin on my porch. It was November. I was impressed. She was throwing everything she had at me. Then she took it too far. One afternoon, I was in my backyard when I heard Jax let out a sharp bark. Alert, focused. I turned just in time to see a police cruiser pulling up in front of my house. 2 officers stepped out. Linda was standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, looking smug enough to cause a solar eclipse. "Sir," one of the officers said, "we received a report of an aggressive animal on the premises." I let out a breath, slow and measured. "Let me guess," I said. "You got a call from Linda Delacroix?" The officer glanced at his notepad. "Ma'am says the dog has been exhibiting dangerous behavior." I looked down at Jax, who was sitting calmly beside me, ears perked, waiting for a command. He was as dangerous as a coiled spring, if you were a threat. I turned to Linda. "You seriously called the cops?" Her expression was downright gleeful. "We take community safety very seriously." I felt my blood pressure spike. But then something clicked. A slow smile spread across my face, because Linda had just made a mistake. A big one. She had called the cops on a military canine handler, and she had no idea what was coming next. I folded my arms and let the moment stretch, watching the flicker of impatience on Linda's face. The officers, 2 guys who looked like they had expected to be dealing with actual crimes today, shifted awkwardly as they waited for my response. "Well," I said, voice calm but deliberate, "this is interesting." I gestured at Jax. "You're telling me my federally certified military-trained working dog is a danger to the community?" One of the officers blinked. Military?" I smiled, slow and measured. "That's right. This is Jax, a Belgian. Malinois, with advanced obedience and protection training. Formerly deployed with me on multiple assignments." I leaned forward just slightly, keeping my voice low. "So, unless there's a new ordinance banning patriotism, I'd love to hear exactly what danger he poses." The second officer glanced down at Jax, who was sitting perfectly still, ears up, waiting for a cue. It was the stillness that threw people off the most. Some dogs wag, some fidget. Jax waited, like a professional. Linda scoffed. "Oh, please. It's not about whatever you're talking about." "Military service?" I said, raising a brow. Linda ignored me, steamrolling ahead. "That's irrelevant. This neighborhood has an aesthetic, and you've chosen to keep a terrifying, aggressive beast that makes people feel unsafe." One of the officers gave her a look as if he too was reevaluating every decision that had brought him to this moment. "Ma'am, has the dog actually attacked anyone?" Linda hesitated. "Well, no, but..." "Threatened anyone? Lunged? Shown signs of aggression?" Linda's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "He could, at any moment. These are dangerous animals." Jax yawned. The first officer let out a sigh, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Ma'am, we're not in the business of removing service or working dogs without cause." He turned back to me, his demeanor shifting. "And Mr. Carter, given your military status, I assume you have documentation for him?" I almost felt bad for what was about to happen. Almost. I pulled out my wallet and flipped to the laminated ID I carried everywhere. Jax's official certification. As an active duty K9, I handed it over. The officer studied it, nodded, and passed it to his partner. "This checks out." He looked back up at Linda. "Ma'am, unless you have evidence of aggression, this complaint isn't going anywhere." Linda's face turned an impressive shade of blotchy red. But the HOA rules..." The officer held up a hand. "HOA rules don't override federal certifications. This dog is legally protected." He handed me back the ID, then, with the kind of weary patience that came from dealing with people like Linda regularly, said, "Please don't waste department resources like this again." Linda stood there, fists clenched at her sides, jaw working furiously as she tried to find a way to twist this back in her favor. But she had nothing. She had lost. The officers got back into their cruiser. I waited until they drove off before turning to Linda. "You sure you don't want to double down on this? Maybe get Homeland Security involved? Her nostrils flared. This isn't over. Oh, I hope not. I smiled, all teeth. I was just starting to have fun. She stormed off, but I could practically feel the resentment radiating off her, in waves. That night, I found another fine taped to my door, $1,000, repeated violations of community standards. This was war. Over the next few days, Linda went nuclear. A letter arrived stating that due to my chronic disregard for HOA policies, I was being reviewed for potential expulsion from the community. She had rallied a small group of Stepford loyalists, and now there was a committee involved. At the same time, my mailbox got mysteriously knocked off its post. My trash cans were overturned again. A concerned neighbor reported that my front lawn was a disgrace, which was rich considering I had it professionally landscaped 2 days ago, and the fines kept rolling in. Unapproved exterior lighting, 250 improper driveway usage, truck parked for more than 24 hours, 500 failure to obtain HOA-approved holiday decor clearance, 300 the kicker? I hadn't even put up holiday decorations yet. Linda was grasping at straws, and she was getting desperate. I needed a way to shut her down for good. So I did what any rational, level-headed person would do. I started digging. HOAs were notorious for being power-hungry, but they were also legally binding organizations, and that meant paperwork. A lot of paperwork. I combed through every bylaw, every amendment, every scrap of legalese in the Cedar Ridge Estates homeowners agreement, and then I found it, a buried clause, a loophole. Buried in the fine print was a rule stating that any resident who had been issued excessive fines within a 6-month period had the right to challenge the HOA board's leadership in a public hearing. That was my in, but I needed one final push. I had to make Linda crack. So, the next morning, I played my last card. I walked out onto my front lawn and planted a Veteran Lives Here sign, right next to my HOA-approved mailbox. Then, I waited. Linda didn't disappoint. Within an hour, she was on my doorstep, face twisted with self-righteous fury. "This sign is not approved," I gestured at it. "You got a rule against honoring veterans?" She faltered. That's not the point. It's an unsanctioned modification to your yard." I crossed my arms. "And what exactly are you going to do about it, Linda?" Her eyes practically vibrated with rage. I'll call an emergency HOA hearing. You're in gross violation of community policies." I fought back a grin. That was exactly what I wanted. She had just played right into my hands, and she had no idea what was coming next. Linda stormed off, no doubt to summon her loyal army of clipboard-wielding suburban enforcers. Perfect. I had exactly 24 hours before my emergency disciplinary hearing, plenty of time to prepare my final blow. The HOA meeting took place in the community clubhouse, a sterile little building with taupe walls and the faint, lingering smell of lemon pledge. By the time I arrived, the place was packed. Dozens of residents, some curious, some openly hostile. Linda stood at the front, flanked by her hand-picked board members, smug as a cat in a canary store. "Nathan Carter," she announced as I took my seat. "This hearing has been called due to your blatant and repeated violations of Cedar Ridge Estates community policies. The board will now determine the appropriate course of action." There were murmurs around the room. People loved a good spectacle. I leaned back, casual. "Before we get to that, I have a question." Linda frowned. "This isn't a Q&A session." "No, but it's a legal proceeding. And per HOA bylaw section 8, subsection C, any homeowner facing disciplinary action has the right to present their case in full before a ruling is made." Her eye twitched. She clearly hadn't expected me to do my homework. "Fine," she said tightly. "Make it quick." I stood, taking my time as I unfolded a stack of printed documents. "Let's talk about rules, Linda," I said, pacing slowly. "You've issued me thousands of dollars in fines, most of which were complete nonsense. You tried to have my dog removed, despite his federal protections. You even targeted my mailbox color, my lawn height, and, somehow, my lack of holiday decorations." I turned to the audience. "Now, I don't know about you, but I'd call that a little extreme." A few scattered nods. I wasn't alone. Linda gave a tight smile. "Mr. Carter, you broke the rules. This community functions on order. If you don't like it, you're welcome to leave. Ah, I said, but what if I don't have to? Silence. Pulled out my trump card. A copy of the HOA bylaws, highlighted and tabbed. See, Linda, I continued, voice laced with satisfaction. There's a fun little loophole in Section 12 that states any homeowner who has received excessive fines in a 6-month period has the right to challenge the HOA board's leadership in a public vote. Linda's face drained of color. I turned to the room. So, friends, neighbors, I'd like to formally challenge Linda Delacroix's position as HOA president. The room erupted. Linda shot up from her seat. You can't do that. I held up the bylaws. It's right here. You wrote the rule, Linda. I grinned. You should really read these things, the board members whispered furiously among themselves. They weren't prepared for this. Linda certainly wasn't. One of the board members, a tired-looking woman, named Diane, cleared her throat. Per the bylaws, if a challenge is issued, we must hold a vote. Linda spun to her. Absolutely not. Linda, Diane said, rubbing her temples. It's in the rules. More murmurs from the crowd. People were interested now. I turned, scanning the audience. Let's take a vote, right now. Who wants new leadership? Hands shot up. Not just a few, dozens. Linda looked around, panicked. Her reign was crumbling, fast. Diane counted, then sighed. The majority has voted to remove Linda Delacroix as HOA president. It was over. Linda's mouth opened and closed, stunned into furious silence. Then, her voice turned sharp, desperate. This is a disaster. You think he'll be better? He doesn't understand this community. You need me. I crossed my arms. Seems like they disagree. The crowd burst into cheers. Linda's power had just vanished in an instant. And she knew it. The fallout was spectacular. Within a week, the new HOA board revoked most of Linda's ridiculous rules. The fines? Gone. The endless surveillance? Over. Linda, meanwhile, vanished. She resigned from the board, probably out of shame. Probably to avoid seeing my face every day. I thought that was the end of it. Until a moving truck pulled up in front of Linda's house. Curious, I wandered over, spotting a realtor's sign in the yard. Linda, moving out. I grinned. New HOA rules not working out for you? She glared daggers. This neighborhood is ruined. I don't know, I said. Seems like people are happier now. Linda huffed, stalking away toward her car. Then, just as she climbed in, Jax barked, once. Loud, sharp. Linda jumped. I leaned down, scratching Jax's ears. That's my boy. She sped off without another word. Cedar Ridge Estates thrived after Linda left. The new HOA? Way more reasonable. No more nitpicky fines, no more clipboard tyranny. And Jax? Jax became a local celebrity. People loved him. Some even started leaving out treats for him during their walks. Kids asked to pet him. One guy even tried to make him an official neighborhood mascot. I sat on my porch watching Jax bask in his new status, tail wagging. Life was good. Then, one day, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Linda. No return address. No explanation. Just a single typed note. You got lucky. I laughed. No, Linda. I played the game, and I won. And that's how you take down an unhinged HOA tyrant. Linda learned the hard way. You don't pick a fight with a military canine handler. And most importantly, never mess with a man's dog.